Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on Past the Pavement with Brady. Today we're going to be talking about more motorcycle gear. More specifically, we're going to be talking about the last piece of gear that you should ever put on before you get on your motorcycle. And that is gloves. Let's get into it. The world of motorcycle gear and riding gear is very saturated, and it can make it difficult to navigate that market and figure out exactly what you're looking for when it comes to each piece of gear that you're putting on. Today, we're going to be asking ourselves a lot of different questions as we explore 5 different categories in terms of buying motorcycle gloves. And so make sure that as we ask those questions, we're honest with ourselves about what the answers are, because that's the only way that you can truly end up having the best experience possible when it comes to buying motorcycle gear. All right, so those 5 categories, the questions that we have to answer for ourselves are, what kind of terrain are we going to be riding? What kind of weather are we willing to ride in? What's our budget whenever we're buying motorcycle gear? What kind of bike are we riding? And finally, what is the purpose of our riding? Are we commuting or are we doing it just for fun? And those 5 questions are going to influence our decision making when it comes to buying and selecting the right motorcycle gloves. So let's dive right into that first category. What kind of terrain are we going to be riding? This question might be one of the most important when it comes to making a decision on which motorcycle gloves you're going to buy. The features and protections are significantly different in motorcycle gloves depending on whether you're buying off-road or MX gloves, adventure gloves, touring gloves, or like a full-on street racing glove. On the off-road end of the spectrum, we see almost no protections built into the gloves. It's essentially just designed to be a good touch point between your hand and the throttle, brake, and clutch on your motorcycle. They tend to maximize and prioritize mobility and comfort whenever you're actually touching the grips on the motorcycle. They also tend to prioritize control in dealing with all of the controls that are on the handlebars of the bike. So they tend to be very thin. They don't tend to be very protective, and they also tend to breathe really well. As we move more toward the middle of the spectrum in the adventure category, where we're trying to mix our off-road and our street riding together, we see some features from both start to creep in. And so these gloves tend to prioritize mobility and control, but also tend to add in some premium construction, premium materials, and also some additional protections. You'll start to see some knuckle protection, some palm protections. You'll see premium materials used on the fingers and the stitching. You'll see lots of leather used that might take time to break in. And as we get into some of the colder weather gloves, you'll also see a large amount of insulation built into those gloves to help keep our hands warm when we're traveling long distances in cold weather. Then, as we move all the way over to the full-on street category, you tend to see a lot of gloves that restrict a lot of mobility and a lot of control. And that's because we're really trying to prioritize those protections. They're going to be made with materials that are stiff and abrasion resistant, lots of armor in them. A lot of street gloves even have fingers that can be sewn together to prevent fingers from breaking if you fall and one gets snagged on something. And ultimately, as we move throughout that spectrum, especially towards the street end, you tend to see a larger glove in general, a glove that is almost always a gauntlet glove, which means that it's going to come up over whatever you're wearing as your upper layer, and then it's going to cinch down over that. That has some benefits and some negatives. On the negative side, that does restrict mobility a little bit, and it can also make it more difficult to take the gloves off and put them on because there's more steps, you have to fumble with more layers. However, on the positive side of that, that means that you can start building in some protections for wrists, and you can also start cutting out some of the elements. But those are some of the primary differences that you're going to see between off-road and street gloves, and then also the adventure and touring gloves that kind of land in the middle and try to prioritize the best of both worlds. So the next question that we have to ask ourselves honestly is, what kind of weather are we willing to ride in? Are you going to be riding when it's wet and rainy outside, when it's cold, maybe even when it's sleeting or snowing? Or are you more interested in riding on nicer days when it might be sunny and hot? Either way, the answer to that question is going to largely determine what kind of gloves that you buy. So if you're looking to ride in only hot weather, sunny days, we'll call you a fair weather rider. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way at all. It's just simply the times that you choose to ride, and that's totally fine. But if that's the kind of rider that you are, you're not going to be looking at something that has liners that are insulated or liners that are waterproof, which means that your gloves are going to end up being a lot thinner. They're probably also going to run a lot cooler. And for the most part, if you're riding off-road, for example, and you're planning to ride on days when there's not a lot of rain or when it's not very wet outside, but then your gloves might get wet if you go through a water crossing or you drop the bike in the water or something like that, ultimately, I think that a glove that doesn't have any waterproofing or insulation in it is still going to be best for you, because those are the gloves that tend to dry out the fastest after they've become wet. Now, if you're the type of rider that's going to ride in all conditions, basically, whether it's cold, whether it's wet and rainy or stormy, no matter the conditions, you want to be on the bike, then you're going to be looking for a glove that has some insulation in it, some waterproof lining, and you might even be looking for a glove that has some other features on it. For example, when I was basically only riding motorcycles to commute and I wasn't using a car to commute, I purchased these gloves right here. These are the Alpine Stars Equinox OutDry gloves. They have a good amount of insulation in them. They also have a waterproof liner in them. And then they also have some other features that help keep the elements out. So interestingly enough, I thought this was a really cool feature when I got these. They have a little windshield wiper on the index finger. It's actually a little rubber wiper that you can take your index finger and scrape across your visor when you're riding, and it clears the water out of the way. These are also like a full cuff or gauntlet glove. They're not so much so in the sense that there's a lot of wrist protections and things like that. However, the intent behind the cuff on this glove is that you would pull it up over like your jacket layer and then cinch it down tightly so that if you're riding in the rain or the cold weather, cold air and water can't get up the sleeve of your jacket because it's overlapping with the glove. This is another time when you're just going to have to be honest with yourself about how cold you're willing to ride in. There's a lot of options when it comes to something like a 3-season glove, and I can show you what some of the options that I've picked out for myself are later on, but ultimately you have to decide how much insulation is right for you. How cold are you truly willing to ride in? And for me anymore, it's truly not that cold. Once it starts getting below 40 degrees during the daytime, I'm usually not going to be out riding very much. However, for temperatures that are below 40 degrees, I can ride in that environment comfortably for a little while with what I have. But for the most part, I'm looking for a glove for myself that's going to keep my hand warm in temperatures that are 40 degrees or above. All right, moving right on down the list, the next thing that you have to ask yourself, what is your budget for gloves? And this is one of those things where you have to be really realistic with yourself, set a budget beforehand. Don't just go in blindly, because the marketing around motorcycle gear will lead you to spend more money than you think you're going to when you walk in. So it's good to have a set budget beforehand. And to give you a realistic expectation of what kind of budget you should be looking at, I have gloves laid out on the bike here that are anywhere from $30 on the least protective and least feature rich to about $200 on the most protective and the most feature rich. Just imagine that you can fall somewhere in between those numbers depending on what you're looking for. $100 is going to get you a really good pair of gloves that don't have a lot of weather protections built into them. If you're looking for something with weather protections, you're probably going to have to raise your budget just a little bit in order to get a glove that's truly going to keep your hand dry and warm in harsh conditions. In addition to that though, when we're talking about budget, there are some other things that you can do aside from just buying an expensive pair of gloves to keep your hands warm and dry. And we'll discuss those options as we move into our next category, which is, what kind of bike are you riding? So in some ways you can kind of trade things in and out in your budget based on gloves and the bike that you're riding, right? Does the bike that you're riding have a lot of wind protection on it? Does it have heated grips on it? What do the grips feel like on your bike? Are they soft and squishy like a Pro Taper pillow top? Or are they not very textured and hard like a heated grip on an adventure bike or a street bike? So as we start diving into how your bike is set up and what kind of bike you're riding, we can start to talk about some of the accessories that might supplement a good pair of gloves, especially if you're trying to ride deeper into the cooler months. First of all, heated grips. If you don't have heated grips, it's a great accessory to have, especially if you're trying to ride into the shoulder seasons and the colder months. Heated grips can really go a long way as far as keeping your hands warm whenever you're riding in cold temperatures. Now, something to be said for that, however, earlier we were talking a little bit about insulation amounts in different types of gloves. It's important not to go just get the thickest gloves that you can possibly get to ride in the wintertime if you're actually wanting to see a benefit out of your heated grips. And the reason for that is because the way that insulation works, it's basically designed to use the heat from your body to keep the inside of that glove warm, which means that it's designed to keep temperatures from the outside from penetrating the inside. So if you're running heated grips and you have a super thick glove, it's actually pretty likely that you're not going to be able to feel your heated grips through the glove. In the past, when I have looked to getting different pairs of gloves that would work for the wintertime riding when I had heated grips, I would actually go and ask the manufacturers how they insulated the glove. And for a lot of manufacturers, if they give a lot of attention to the product development, they're going to make the insulation thinner on the palm side than they do on the back side, which is great because the back side of our hand is what's taking all of the air, all of the water, everything. And so that means that if you have heated grips, you're going to be able to feel it better on the palm of your hand, and then the outside of your hand is going to stay better protected because of that thicker insulation. So that's just something to consider if your bike has heated grips and you're thinking about getting some winter gloves or something. The other accessory that we can put on our bikes to kind of help with wind resistance is something called hippo hands. And there's lots of companies that make versions of hippo hands. You can get them from Tusk. GV has made versions of them in the past. But ultimately, I think hippo hands are probably the best version of them out there. Unfortunately, hippo hands will never look good on a bike. However, they are one of the most effective accessories as far as taking you deeper into the colder months, into the shoulder seasons, keeping your hands warm and dry. With hippo hands on my motorcycle, I've actually been able to ride with thin summer gloves down to like 40 degrees just with heated grips. So if you're truly looking to ride in all conditions, I would say when it comes to your bike, you should be looking at a pair of hippo hands and some heated grips. Some other general considerations for the type of bike that you're riding is, does your bike have handguards? How much wind do the handguards block? I know on my 300 Rally here, I can actually get away with riding into some colder temperatures than I can on my GS because I feel like the design of the handguards actually pushes a little bit more wind outside or over my hand instead of at my hand. Now, obviously that's offset quite a bit by heated grips on the GS. However, I'm just talking about if the heated grips aren't on the GS, and obviously I don't have them on the 300 Rally. So apples to apples, I think that handguards make a big difference in how warm your hands will stay whenever you're riding in colder temperatures. Something else to consider whenever you're talking about bike-specific things and how to get a pair of gloves to fit your bike is what type of grips are you running, right? Are you running soft, plushy grips that kind of dampen the vibrations of the bike for you? Or are you running grips that are going to transfer every bit of vibration and they don't have a lot of squish and give to them? That can play a big role in what gloves you should go with whenever you're looking for a new set. For example, if we look at these Lee at 1.5s, which I would say are probably the most basic gloves that I have here, there's absolutely no padding on the palm of them. In fact, there's no padding anywhere on this glove. However, if you look at something that is a little bit more feature rich in their line, for example, these Lee at 7.5 X-Flows, there's quite a bit of padding on the palm here. And that padding on the palm actually does a lot as far as making you more comfortable riding your motorcycle for long distances, especially if you have something like a single cylinder bike that vibrates a lot. That vibration, a lot of it is getting soaked up by the padding in the palm instead of being transferred directly to your hands. Lastly, let's talk about the purpose of your riding. Are you going out and riding just for fun, or are you intending to be on the bike all the time? Maybe it's your primary form of transportation. Maybe you even have a car that you can drive when the weather's a little nastier, but you're not going to do it unless you absolutely have to. Those factors and the answers to those questions determine a lot about what kind of gloves that you should get, right? If you're just commuting, maybe 20 or 30 minutes one way, maybe a lot of it's through town at lower speeds or something like that, you can get away with a glove that's a lot less protective when it comes to elemental protection. If you are the type of person that wants to use your bike all the time for everything, and you live in a place that gets pretty cold, then you're probably gonna have to spend a little bit more on gloves that are gonna be more protective. By the same token, if you're the type of rider that is going out just for fun, you may not find yourself riding in harsher conditions very often, because unless you're really well prepared for it, harsh conditions can make your motorcycle rides not very fun. So when you're considering those 5 categories, right? Your budget, how's your bike set up? What kind of riding are you doing? What kind of weather are you going to be riding in, and what's the purpose of your riding? You can kind of paint a clear picture of what your priorities are in a glove. And so I've got a bunch of different gloves laid out here on my motorcycle that I'm going to walk through with you and just kind of tell you some of the features and tell you what I use it for and why I have them, and ultimately why they work for me and my riding. Just like with motorcycles, if you can have more gloves that are tailored to specific uses, just like if you can have more motorcycles that are tailored to specific uses, the happier you're gonna be. But that being said, let's jump into what we've got in front of us here. So right here, we've got a pair of the Leatt 1.5 Gripper or Grip R gloves. Leatt, when they make their gloves, they have something kind of unique about them in that the palm of the gloves are this sort of like microfiber material. Really comfortable, really nice as far as dexterity goes. This type of material feels really good on soft gummy grips like Pillow Top Pro Tapers. Really comfortable to wear on the bike. I would say though that these gloves should not be used unless you are riding in a controlled environment where you know that if you wreck, you're not going to go down and put your hand on a rock. You're definitely not going to be falling on the pavement, because these gloves will literally shred if you fall on the pavement with them. They're a very basic glove when it comes to protection, but they are very comfortable and they offer a lot of control over your handlebars. Next, I have a pair of mountain bike cold weather gloves, and these are actually Bree's. Bree doesn't like wearing super thick gloves because ultimately, like what we talked about before, really thick gloves that are insulated heavily put a damper on your dexterity and your control quite a lot. And Bree really values having that control over her handlebars. So instead of having a really thick pair of gloves, she prefers to use these as a sort of like glove liner for her thinner summer gloves. And that tends to work out well for her when we're riding down to temperatures as cold as 50 degrees for a couple of hours. Next, I know a lot of people are using something like this. Maybe you're using like a Mechanics brand glove, not a Cobalt brand glove, but a lot of people are using like a basic work glove for their riding. And for a lot of people, that works okay. I would say, if anything, this is a summer only glove. This is not going to keep your hand warm in the colder months. Not a lot of features specific to motorcycles or anything built in here. I find that they also don't fit as well. They're generally like a roomier or baggier fit on your hands, which can inhibit some of your dexterity and control over the bars. For the most part, I have these to pack with me so that when I get to camp, I can use them when I'm like gathering firewood or something. I'm really prone to nicking my hands when I'm messing with stuff, so always good to have something like this. And you can also use like a motorcycle glove to double as like a camp work glove as well. Next on the list, we have the 100% Cognito gloves. These offer a little bit more protection than the Leatt 1.5s in the sense that they are slightly thicker, not much. And then they also have some D3O knuckle protections as well. These are kind of falling apart. We've had them for a long time. We've used the heck out of them. These also have a Velcro closure on the cuff. Basically, again, only use these gloves if I know that I'm going to be doing something off-road in a controlled environment and it's really hot outside and I don't want to wear anything thicker than what I have to. Next, we have the Icon 39ers, I think is what they're called. This is actually my second or third set of these gloves. I keep them as a backup oftentimes. These make a great summer adventure riding glove. They're really cheap. They come in at like less than $40. They have some interesting features and protections on them that I really like. They make a good combination for a good multi-use adventure ride. We see some synthetic fibers in the palm here. That's all good. There's a leather patch right here on the heel of your hand so that if you go down and you catch yourself with the heel of your hand, it's going to have a little bit more abrasion resistance. There's also some very soft padding on the knuckles, which means that it's not going to restrict your mobility, but it's still going to give you the comfort of having some padding there and also give you a little bit of protection if you end up hitting your knuckles on something. There's also some vents on each finger that are really interesting. They work pretty well. If you value something that gives you a lot of mobility, a little bit of protection, and is pretty stealthy as far as a motorcycle glove goes, these are a great option. And they're cheap. Moving up the line, this is Bree's pair of Alpinestars copper gloves. I find these to be a really great multi-use glove for summertime months. I would say that you can probably ride in these gloves down to 60 degrees. If you're gonna be riding in those temperatures all day with these gloves, your hands are probably gonna get a little cold. They have hard knuckle protection laid in underneath the fabric on top. I did find on the pair of these that I had, I wore them so much that, again, I literally wore them out and could not wear them anymore. But they lasted a really long time. Great value glove. But as they started to wear out, that hard protection started to poke through on the inside of the glove and started to rub against my knuckles, and it was really uncomfortable. Otherwise, these gloves are fantastic. There's a little bit of padding, a tiny bit of padding on each finger that you can't really feel when it's on there. So you get a little bit, like tiny bit of protection on there without really even knowing that it's there. They also have this synthetic material here, kind of where the knuckles on the palm of your hand would contact your grip. And so it creates a little bit of an extra barrier there in the friction point and the pressure point between your hand and the handlebars. It also has some padding on the heel of your hand here. That's really nice. Again, if you're riding the motorcycle for a long time and it's a vibey motorcycle, it can dampen some of those vibrations, but also if you fall and you scrape your hand, that's gonna catch and it's gonna reduce some of the impact on your hand, which is really nice. These are mostly sort of like a mesh material, and so they're not gonna offer a lot of abrasion resistance, but they are gonna vent really well in hot months. Alpinestars coppers, I believe, come in about $70. After my Alpinestars copper gloves wore out, what I decided to do was try something different. That's something that I like to do in the motorcycle gear world pretty often. When something wears out, even if I liked the thing that wore out, I might move on to something different just because I like trying new things. And kind of exploring the market a little bit. Leatt has been really good about making products for the adventure motorcycle community in the last couple of years. And this is one of the things that they've developed for that community. These are the Leatt X-Flow 7.5 gloves. And these are specifically the short cuff version. They also make a full cuff version, but for a summer glove, I really wanted to go with a short cuff. I just find it's easier to mess with whenever you're trying to put it on with a jacket or a jersey or something like that. You don't have to worry about whether or not your jersey's inside the cuff or whatever. It just kind of rides. Some cool features on these gloves. So like we talked about with the 1.5s earlier, these have that microfiber material. They're filthy right now, but they have that same microfiber material to create a really comfortable touch point between your hand and the motorcycle. I find, again, these work really well on soft, squishy grips like Pro Taper pillow tops, and they might take a little bit of getting used to on a harder grip like heated grips on an adventure bike or stock grips on a lot of street bikes. They have some soft knuckle armor over the top, which I find to be really comfortable. You can hardly tell that it's there. They also have leather sewn into each finger, which is nice, although on the inside, when your fingers are up against the tips, you can kind of feel the seams where that leather and the synthetic material come together. That takes a little bit of getting used to. There's also some padding on the thumb here. I guess just a little bit of impact protection there. I don't feel that that's really necessary, but what I do really like about it is that there's padding in multiple spots on the heel of the hand on the palm of the glove. And so again, this is gonna be good for that impact protection if you're falling and you're catching yourself with your hand. It's also gonna be good about providing sort of a vibration dampener between your hand and your motorcycle if you have a motorcycle that vibrates a lot, or if you have a motorcycle that has really hard grips on it. As far as putting these gloves on, I like that they have a loop that you can stick your finger in and pull on to get them on your hand. That's really nice. And then they're gonna have a Velcro closure as well. On the outside of the wrist here, right where your wrist bone is, there's also some more soft rubber padding. It's nice that they have that on these gloves. I appreciate that protection. All right, so aside from Bree's kind of cold weather mountain bike gloves that she uses as glove liners, all we've talked about so far are essentially my hot weather options. I'm not gonna generally ride for very long in temperatures less than 60 degrees in any of these gloves with heated grips even. If I had hippo hands, like we talked about before, that might be a different story. I could probably ride in any of these gloves with heated grips and hippo hands down to 30 degrees for a couple hours and still be comfortable. Sometimes that's just not the reality that we live in, and we do end up in colder temperatures, and maybe we're not running hippo hands. Maybe you don't even have hand guards on your motorcycle, and so you need something that's a little warmer and a little more protective. As we move down the line even further, we're going to start talking about some things that are really feature rich and ultimately are going to cost a little bit more, but they're going to be warmer. They're going to have some elemental protection and then also some more street focused protections built in there too. But if you're riding in the cold and you're doing off-road things, slow speeds, you're working on the bike, then a lot of the summer gloves are going to work even in colder times for you. These tend to incorporate more street protections because when your hands get cold on the bike, it's probably because you're sitting on the bike, you're not working very hard on it, and you're likely doing some sort of adventure touring. What I have here are the Alpinestars Andes V3 gloves. I just picked these up because I wanted something that was a little thinner than the winter gloves that I was using. But I would consider these to be pretty much a full-on winter glove, and they have a lot of protections built into them. Really nice materials. They do have a harder knuckle on them, but it's not as hard as like a carbon knuckle like what you'd find on the Alpinestars Copper. Really nice reflective material. I don't believe it's super fabric, but it kind of has that same feel and texture as super fabric does, which is the type of fabric that has little ceramic beads in it. These provide a good amount of insulation for the amount of mobility that you get in them. And I would say the same for the protections. They feel pretty well built. Like I said, they have the knuckle protection, they're thick gloves, they have synthetic material on the palm to protect from abrasion, and some additional padding on the heel of the hand, just like some of our other better glove options have here. But they still tend to give you a lot of mobility and they're not insanely bulky. I think these are a really good option if you're looking to get into some 3-season riding, maybe even extend your riding into winter months a little bit. They're also waterproof with Alpinestars Dry Star Liner. There are 2 Velcro closures on this. There is one closure that keeps the glove tight on your hand. It kind of goes around your wrist. And then there is a larger cuff closure that's going to help with closing this around whatever layer is running into the glove that you're wearing on top. Still have really good mobility with this. One reason why I did want to get these gloves over the ones that I already had was because of the bulkiness. So the winter gloves that I had are definitely a little bit warmer, a little bit more protective from an elemental perspective, but they are also significantly bulkier. And on smaller bikes like a 300 Rally, you don't get a lot of space on your grip to put your hand. And so if you're wearing a summer glove, it feels totally normal and most people's hands are going to fit within the grip. But when you start putting on bigger, thicker gloves, a lot of times your hand and like your pinky can start to bleed over the edge of the grip and it just feels a little bit unnatural. All right, moving down the line a little further, we have the, bear with me while I try to pronounce these, Alpinestars Valparaiso V2 Dry Star gloves. These are a pretty well insulated glove. These are definitely the most street focused gloves that we own. They're pretty inhibitive of your control and dexterity on the handlebars. Some standout things about these gloves. So remember when we talked about street focused gloves earlier in the video, we talked a lot about how they're gonna be built with heavier construction, heavier materials, stiffer materials, and they're going to be built a lot more for abrasion resistance. And they're not going to offer as much control as some of our other gloves that we've talked about already. There's a lot of leather built into this glove, specifically in the areas of impact, like the knuckles. The knuckles have no give at all. These are like a hard carbon knuckle. The palm also has quite a bit of leather, as well as an additional patch here. Again, where your hand would connect with the grip, or even where you might scrape your hand if you fall and your hand is open. We have kind of like a TPU slider in place of where some of the palm padding has been on some of our other gloves. But we have a very similar Velcro closure to what we had on the Alpinestars Andes gloves, where there is one closure that exists for tightening the glove to your hand, and then another closure that exists for cinching the glove or the cuff down over whatever you're wearing on top. There is also a little windshield, or they call it a visor wiper, on the thumb. So if you're wearing this glove and you run into some rain, you can take your thumb and you can wipe across your visor, and it should clear the water from your visor, at least for a second. That is the Alpinestars Valparaiso. Valparaiso. These also have a waterproof liner in them, so it's another iteration of the Alpinestars Dry Star liner. All right, the last glove on our list, and this is going to be a good adventure glove, very much for cold weather though, cold or very wet weather. I've gotten a lot of use out of these gloves back when I used to commute solely on my motorcycle, even in the winter months, regardless of whether it was raining or not. I did lots of highway commutes back from work when it was less than 30 degrees Fahrenheit in these gloves, and that was like a 30-mile highway run. You can imagine that's a pretty cold condition to be riding in, especially if it's rainy or wet. These gloves did a great job of keeping me warm for that period of time in those conditions, even without heated grips. These are the Alpinestars Equinox Out Dry gloves. They do no longer make these, which is kind of a bummer because they're really an excellent glove if you're looking for something that will take you all the way through the winter time. These have a very comfortable construction to them. Pretty much all the leather on these gloves are on the palm side, and that means that you're getting a lot of abrasion resistance, but you're also getting a good contact point between your hand and the bike. Like a lot of our other Alpinestars gloves, these also have an additional patch of material on the part of your hand that's going to be taking the most impact in a fall, or the part of your hand that has the most pressure on your motorcycle grips when you're riding. This has multiple palm pads on it to dampen vibrations and provide some impact resistance. These also have some additional padding on the thumbs, like where your thumb connects to the palm of your hand on the outside. These have a very hard carbon feeling knuckle, has no give to it, with a soft material on the outside. They are insulated so well that you don't have the same issue with them that you would have potentially with the Alpinestars Copper, where the hard knuckle starts to wear through the inside of the glove and rub on your hand. One thing that I forgot to mention about the Alpinestars Valparaisos that this also has is a sewn pinky. So if you fall and wreck, your pinky cannot separate from your hand and dislocate or break. At least as severe as it could if they were not sewn together. Unlike the other two insulated Alpinestars gloves that we looked at, this only has one Velcro closure, and it's designed to just go over whatever you're wearing. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, this is one of the gloves that is insulated a little bit thinner on the palm side than it is on the outside. You also have a visor wiper on the index finger on this glove. So again, if it's raining, you can take your index finger and you can clear your visor with that little wiper. So hopefully you have asked yourself the questions that produce the categories that we talked about in making decisions about buying motorcycle gloves. And hopefully you've had the ability to answer those questions for yourself as well, and go into your motorcycle glove buying experience with a little bit more knowledge on what your priorities are when you're buying gloves. Hopefully going through my fleet of gloves here in front of me has also helped you determine what might be good for you and what use cases you're going to use your gloves in. I highly recommend any pair of gloves out here for different purposes, for different reasons. You know, based on your answers to the questions that we've asked in today's video, any one of these pairs of gloves could be good for you and your riding. And the best thing for you is every single pair of gloves up here is still available today, with the exception of the last pair that I showed you, the Alpinestars Equinox Out Dry gloves. Those are no longer available, but all of these other gloves are available for you to check out. Obviously, I'm a fan of Alpinestars gear. I really like a lot of the Leatt gear that's coming out lately, but there's lots of other brands out there that make gloves that are similar to these that you can look at as well. In the past, I've owned Revit gloves that are very high quality. Climb gloves look to be very high quality. We've got a pair of Icons in here. We've got some bleed over from the MX world and the mountain bike world with 100%. Really, it doesn't matter what brand that you get. It doesn't matter which model you get. It doesn't necessarily matter how much money you spend. What matters is that you pick the glove that suits you and your riding and your motorcycle the best. And as long as you do that, you're going to have a good experience with your motorcycle gloves. I hope that you can find something that you like. I hope that this video helped you make some of those decisions. If you have any questions about any of the gloves that I've mentioned here today that I haven't already covered, please feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to get back to you on it. If you liked the video, please click the like button. Feel free to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.